tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
The big story that I wanted to talk about today is this piece in the Canadian press that was published everywhere. CBC picked it up, CTV, I think even the Toronto Sun did. And it is a story taking aim at Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives over their discussion of the World Economic Forum. The story in the Canadian press is accusing Poilievre of, quote, embracing language of mainstream conspiracy theories. This is, as Poilievre puts it, a hit piece through and through. It quotes two so-called experts, one of whom is a Liberal donor, but they conveniently leave that out of the article. Let's bring in Spencer Fernando here, a fantastic independent journalist, and apart from half the cabinet, not, as I understand it, an alumnus of Klaus Schwab's Young Global Leaders program, although who knows, apparently half the people in the country are here. Spencer, it is wonderful to talk to you. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Good to be here.
Now, how this all started, of course, is Pierre Poilievre says what he's been talking about for quite a while here. And then the Canadian press just pounces on this and accuses him of embracing conspiracy theories for expressing a position that I think most Canadians would probably find utterly unobjectionable, right?
Yeah, and one point I make when I talk about the WEF and how people respond to it is that there's a big nuance that's being obviously missed on purpose by the media, which is there's really two kinds of critics of the WEF. There are the legit conspiracy theorists, the ones who claim, they caused the pandemic. Obviously, no evidence for that. No one credible believes that. Who claim that there's some, evil, sinister organization, controlling the whole world behind the scenes. But then there's the very legitimate criticism, which is what Poilievre is talking about, which is that, if you look at what they talk about, it's this kind of policies that are hurting Canada right now, driving up the cost of energy, moving decision-making, away from a lot of, national governments and the electorates of countries having influence over their governments and, bringing things up to, a higher level that's more detached from the day-to-day lives of people. And that's obviously a negative thing. So, of course, the media is not making that nuanced point. They're not talking about how there's different kinds of criticism, some that are legitimate, some that are not. They're just trying to lump it all in as a conspiracy theory and hoping that it'll just stop people from talking about it.
Yeah, and it was a very similar dynamic to what we saw on a lot of the COVID discussions where, there were people that absolutely had, any number of conspiratorial beliefs. But then we also had this group in the middle that are saying, well, hang on, I believe COVID's real, but I've got questions about how it originated, or I'm skeptical that we need a vaccine mandate or a vaccine passport to get through it. And then those people were accused of being conspiracy theorists. And it's become one of the most effective vehicles to really shut down criticism. If you can just really lump it all into one category and say anyone raising any questions is a conspiracy theorist, even if in the case of Poilievre, the media failed to come up with a single example of anything he said that was conspiratorial. The accusation was really just, well, he says this stuff and other people have conspiracy theories about them.
Yeah, I mean, all you have to do is just play like the clip you played there, which is what's actually funny about that is, the Norwegian lady there was a lot more honest than most of our politicians. She was at least admitting that the policies she supports are going to cause real pain, right? I mean, you don't see that kind of honesty from the Liberal government. I mean, on the one hand, they say, oh, we're very worried about the cost of living. Oh, here's a new carbon tax. Here are a bunch of policies that drive up the cost of energy. So they never even have the guts to admit what they're actually doing. But yeah, I think we've seen how this plays out, in 4 or 5 months. There'll be some mainstream media articles saying, well, actually, the WEF does have some problematic aspects to it. Here's why people are legitimately concerned. It's almost like they want to be the ones to get there first to talk about something. And if they don't, then they just dismiss it until they start talking about it. Then it's legitimate. As you say with COVID, you couldn't bring up the lab leak idea. Oh, no, that's insane. Only crazy people will believe that. People got banned from social media for talking about it. People got in serious trouble. And then all of a sudden, a year or two later, New York Times, other, credible publications, as some people see them, they start talking about it. Then, okay, now it's okay to talk about. Now it's okay. And that's a big problem in a free society because the whole point is we're supposed to, find out the truth through debating ideas openly and honestly. And if we just, shut people down for having opinions that are not, that people think are too conspiratorial, then we're not going to get to the truth, right?
Yeah, you're quite right about that. And I go back to, I don't know if you were on when I brought it up, this headline in CBC of taking aim at Davos when Trump was there, and they say Trump the populist descends on globalist Davos. So when Donald Trump was going there, it was all too easy for the left to criticize this and say, oh yeah, it's these out of touch elites. And now that it's the right that has concerns with WEF. It seems to be conspiratorial in the same people's eyes. And I can actually fully admit that the left may have been much better at sussing out the problems with this organization many years ago, because it used to be, I mean, Chrystia Freeland, when she was a journalist, wrote the book on this organization and made a lot of very good points about it. Naomi Klein, who I don't agree with on very many things as well, was a very, very significant critic of this. And a lot of the left-wing protests that there used to be there were kind of the very similar things that we see in like the Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump agreement on, the problems of free trade and the problems of globalization, and how it's really become a class struggle in a lot of ways. And I think that there's something perhaps that the right could have learned about that sooner. But it is interesting the way the media responds to these things, because when it was the left raising these criticisms, there was never, that I recall, any denunciation of them. They were never called conspiracy theorists. But now that the right is raising these concerns, or more of the right raising these concerns, we have to denounce the denouncers.
Yeah, I think a big thing too is that there's been, a not so subtle shift in, I don't know if you want to call it political ideology or the way people talk about things, but what does it mean to be conservative, liberal, left, right? There's a lot of overlap and a lot of, I think, confusion for people. And so, it used to be very conservative to say, well, keep taxes low, have free trade, be very capitalist and, support the free market. I'd still define myself that way. Well, whether that's still considered conservative or not, you're seeing more of a shift towards, state intervention, cultural conservatism in some ways. But I think the media, instead of talking about the nuance, which I guess goes over some of their heads, they look for the easiest, thing they can say, which is, fascism, conspiracy theorist, anti-Semitic. I see some people trying to call Poilievre anti-Semitic, which is obviously absurd. And so it's just, a lot of it's just laziness. It's not wanting to delve deeper into the issue, not wanting to deal with any complexity or nuance. It's just, what's the quickest insult I can find to make the whole issue go away, or just label someone badly, and then people will stop talking about it. So I think that's part of what we're dealing with too, is just very lazy journalism in many cases.
What's your thought on how Poilievre has been relatively unrepentant? Because I know the last couple of conservative leaders, Aaron O'Toole and Andrew Scheer, were both fairly timid when it came to the media. And they both really buckled when the media was going after them. Whereas Poilievre, to his credit, hasn't done that. And even on the WEF stuff, he came out after that CP article and just said, no, it's a hit job. It's ridiculous. I'm not buying into it. Do you think he'll be able to keep that up? And do you think he will keep that up?
I think so. I mean, the polls are looking pretty good for him. Obviously that's how he campaigned for the leadership. So I think, I don't see him wanting to change from that perspective. Even if he did, I think he'd face so much pressure because of how he campaigned that he wouldn't really be able to. Not that, of course, he wants to. And, the reason I think it's working, and this is, I think, a deeper point for why the liberals are struggling, is that things are just bad in the country. I mean, we can talk about all the complexities of certain things, but in many cases, people are looking around and saying, well, the liberals have been in power for 8 years and things are getting worse. Okay, this guy, Poilievre, well, what's he talking about? Okay, we need affordable housing. We need to deal with crime. We need to lower the cost of living. Pretty common sense things. People look at that and say, well, at least this guy's addressing the issues I have. And then they turn on that news and they say, oh, the liberals say Poilievre is a dangerous, scary conspiracy theorist. And I think people are just going to start to tune that out. I mean, they've heard it so often. It really doesn't match up with reality. And so I think, I'm not shocked the liberals are trying this. I mean, they've got to try something, right? In politics, you throw whatever attack you think is going to work, but they don't really have much left in terms of saying, oh, look how great we're doing. Look how great things are for you. Look how affordable everything is. And so the other issue too is much of the establishment media. If you look at Bill C-18, how they're all lining up behind that, despite it being an absolute disaster. They're really just desperate for money, and they know a conservative government is not going to give them a bunch of money, is not going to, restrict social media companies and restrict free speech for their benefit. And so they now have a vested financial interest in trying to keep the liberals in power. So I think it's important to filter, our perception of their coverage through that lens as well, which is that, look, they want the liberals to stay in power because they want the liberals to give them taxpayer dollars and restrict, independent competitors. So that's going to certainly shade their coverage.
Yeah, and to be honest, when you talk about how terrible things are for Canadians right now, a lot of these issues exist outside of Canada, and that's a legitimate question of the WEF on a different plane, which is, okay, you guys think that you're solving the world's problems here. Well, you had Putin speaking in 2021, and a few months later, Russia invades Ukraine. You had, all these great people in the private sector and the public sector talking to each other about solving things, and inflation's out of control. We've got Europe that is in for another very cold winter because of energy issues. So, I mean, even if you don't believe that they're influential, the question is, all right, what are you providing? What service are you providing to world leaders that go there when you failed at the most basic things? And I don't know if there's an answer for that. And to Canadian leaders, I'd say, where's the value proposition? What are you getting for Canadians when you hang out with these billionaires? Because I've yet to see that.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is just, it's like a club for people. You hear, oh, celebrities are going there, politicians are going there, people want to get involved and, be seen there. And I guess it's some sort of credibility boost in some cases. But I think, a big part of all of this is that there's a lot of people who have, it's a good way to put it. Their purpose for living in many ways is all about being involved in some sort of, world historical battle or, being a historical figure. I think Stephen Guilbeault is a good example of that. He obviously sees himself as some sort of heroic figure who, it doesn't matter how many, people he hurts, economically, it's all for the greater good, as you mentioned earlier, the so-called greater good, that a lot of politicians use to do things that aren't really good ideas. And so he's obviously sure that he's the good guy. He doesn't question himself at all. He just gets more and more aggressive, more restrictions on energy, more bans on plastic and everything, make people's life more difficult for the greater good to save the planet. Mm-hmm. And so, Davos, I think, gives people a chance to congregate and feel like they're being part of something, right? They're part of, reshaping the world and saving the planet. And so, when they're told, well, actually, nothing you do is working, it's only making things worse, and people don't really like you and don't want to hear this kind of stuff, they're not just going to give in, right? Because it's their whole purpose is built up in that. And so I think that's something we need to look at for, the types of people we elect and types of people we trust in a position of power. Is you don't really want people who think that they're saving the planet or that they're, some big historical figure. You want someone who wants to manage the government well, keep taxes low, have services be relatively effective. You don't want people who have some sort of massive mission in mind. And so I think that's part of what the whole Davos thing is. I mean, obviously Klaus Schwab, I think he does sometimes talk up his own influence because that's, where his sense of purpose comes from is, he's orchestrating everything around the world. I'm sure it makes him feel good to see people say that about him. But, if the WEF was really running everything, I think they'd be a little more careful and subtle about it. I mean, would you pick Klaus Schwab, like basically seems like a villain ripped out of a James Bond movie? Would he really be the front man for it? I mean, a little too on the nose sometimes, I think.
Well, yeah, you're right about that, and that's the problem. I mean, it's like even if the WEF is not the shadowy global cabal of people running the world, man, do they not do much to dissuade people from taking that image. Yeah. It's like right out of central casting, and it's a future is built by us. It's okay, fine. Yeah. Spencer Fernando, independent journalist extraordinaire. You can get his work at spencerfernando.com. Always good to talk to you, Spencer. Thanks for coming on.
No problem. Take care.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.